kind of had a feeling that this was going to be the end result, but it's now official. The Rangers have fired head coach David Quinn. Most of the rest of the staff, besides goalie coach Benoit Allaire, who has been with the organization for a long time. He's been through many different coaches, but David Quinn is gone. This doesn't come as much of a surprise. The big shocker was John Davidson and Jeff Gorton being dismissed. You know, maybe as the days went on, you could talk yourself into the fact that David Quinn would return, but it never really made much sense. If anything, he would have been the one that would be fired, and they would have kept Gorton and Davidson. But Chris Drury, who I think is probably someone who endorsed David Quinn. They have Boston University ties, and, you know, I think David Quinn, all in all in his 3 years, did a decent job. I think that it was always known that he was going to be there for this portion of the rebuild. And I think that he was a good hire after Alain Vigneault. Am I upset that he's fired? No, not really. And in fact, once the other moves were made, that was kind of my preference. If they felt like, it feels like things are being expedited just a little bit. I have faith in Chris Drury to continue with the plan, and you just hope that Jim Dolan doesn't really get in the way too much. I'd like to think that he'll give Drury the autonomy to do as he pleases, but with Quinn, I just think if you had reasonable expectations for what this team was, David Quinn did a fine job. I wish him well. I really do. This is not one of those situations where I have any sort of hate towards David Quinn, not at all. And it's kind of funny, even though Alain Vigneault led the Rangers to a Stanley Cup final, I walk away, and who knows, maybe time will tell a different story. I walk away from Quinn really with not being so upset with Quinn. It's like I'm more anti-AV than anti-David Quinn. So, but this was the right decision. And for Drury, too, you want to have that clean slate. I think if Quinn had been brought back, if the Rangers had struggled early, there would have been talks about him being fired. I think it makes a lot more sense to get him out of there. Unfortunately, Jacques Martin was let go as well, who did a really good job of coming in there and really helping stabilize the defense and really helping the penalty kill. He did a great job, Jacques Martin, replacing Lindy Ruff. But this also makes sense. You're not going to keep him around. The new coach is going to have his own staff. That's just kind of an unfortunate byproduct. You know, Quinn in year one, I think, was able to get the Rangers playing the right way, where I think later on with Vigneault, the expiration date was just passed with AV, where, you know, they sent the letter during AV's final season. You just knew that the time was up there. And I think Quinn, I really had no problems with him in year one. And that was a roster that was not very good and was in transition. And then in year two, again, I think they really exceeded expectations. And then it was a reality check what happened in Carolina. But that shouldn't have been held against him. The fact that they were even in that position at all, I think, was really a good job by Quinn. A theme that I saw in the first 3 seasons was definitely getting off to slow starts. And that wasn't great. And even in certain games, getting off to slow starts. I think that overall they responded to Quinn. Like, if they had a bad game, you could expect the next game them to come out strong, but just too inconsistent. And effort was at times a problem. But I think Quinn expected a lot of his players, and I think that they, you know, gave him that respect back for the most part. And then this season, just a really wild year between COVID, between the division alignment, between shortened schedule of only 56 games, and just everything in between with Tony DeAngelo, Artemi Panarin, of course, injuries that you go through, which were prevalent. Then, of course, the Tom Wilson situation. It was and I'm probably forgetting other things, just a crazy year. And then even the Davidson and Gorton firings that Quinn was still around for. So, will he get a head coaching job again? Maybe. I couldn't say one way or another. I, again, wish him well. And this was the right move considering the circumstances. Now, if they had left the old regime in, I think he probably would have been back. I think he would have been. there's some interesting candidates out there to take his place. There's a few that I'm interested in, a few that I'm not, but I think they're going to be going for someone who has experience. I think that is what sort of trajectory-wise where this team is. That makes sense. David Quinn was someone who had no head coaching experience in the NHL. He was a college head coach and a good college head coach. And I think people can say what they want, but I think he did a pretty good job of fostering in some of these young kids. It didn't always work. That's going to happen, but he really, I mean, I think that maybe you would have liked to see him play some of the young kids more than he did, but I think we saw progression. So now, the first person that I want to talk about, but I don't think that he's going to get the job, I don't think it's going to happen, is John Tortorella. He's a very polarizing figure, and I think that some Ranger fans would welcome him back, some not at all. I'm on the side that I would. I just don't, my gut just tells me it doesn't happen with Torts, and there is history there. I think he has a good relationship with Jim Dolan. Glenn Sather did fire him, but I think that that relationship was repaired if there was a problem at all. It was really a player mutiny at the end of 2013. He was supposed to stick around, and then after the exit interviews, I guess a lot of players just couldn't deal with it anymore, and he was gone. And the only player that still remains was a young Chris Kreider. So I think him and Artemi Panarin had a good relationship in Columbus. As far as Chris Drury is concerned, Chris Drury was the captain when Tortorella became head coach. So, and I think there's a good dynamic there. So I think he's definitely in the running. I think he's probably one of the top candidates. I would be fine with it. I absolutely would. It's risky, but if you can somehow blend the talent they already have with Tortorella's sort of blocking shot mentality, clogging the zone, one can consider it boring hockey, but I think if you can blend those two things together, it could really be successful. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Someone who I like, who has a good resume, who might be the favorite, is Gerard Gallant. Now, Gallant, most recently with Vegas. And I know him going to Seattle, who's going to be the new expansion team, that definitely checks off some boxes. Now, I'm not sure where Gallant's head's at in terms of what his preference would be, what his options are, but certainly Gallant to Seattle would make some sense. But Gallant with Vegas in year one reached the Cup final. And he was let go, and surprisingly, during the third season. So the second season was when they lost that crazy series in Game 7 to the Sharks. And then, weirdly enough, Pete DeBoer gets fired by San Jose, and then Vegas fires Gallant, and they hire DeBoer. It is strange that Gallant was let go, especially since he had a lot of success. And I feel like he's had some decent success with not that much there roster-wise. He was also in Florida at the beginning of Jonathan Huberdeau and Alex Barkov's career, at the beginning of their career. There was definitely a modicum of success there in his tenure and his stint with the Panthers. He was also with Columbus earlier, maybe in the mid-2000s, maybe later than that. But it seems like his shelf life is kind of short. It's like he's there for about 3 years each. He gets fired around the same time, but I think Gallant checks off a lot of boxes. I think that he's a no-nonsense guy, but I think someone that the players seem to like in his other stops. So Gallant, definitely a heavy name to look out for. Someone else that I think is probably in the mix, and I guess I'll go through this, and I'll give you my opinion, after I name some of these candidates. But Rick Tocchet, don't mind Rick Tocchet. I'd prefer Gallant. I'd prefer Torts. Tocchet might be next on my list in terms of realistic candidates. We'll talk about some others that probably aren't realistic, but Tocchet did a decent job in Arizona. He doesn't seem to have much of a connection Ranger-wise, I don't believe. And I guess for that case, neither does Gallant to my knowledge. But Tocchet did all right with Arizona. Again, that roster wasn't filled with great talent, but it seems like he got the most out of them. But I guess overall, not a whole lot of success, other than when Arizona beat Nashville in the bubble. Other than that, they weren't a laughingstock, I wouldn't say. I mean, maybe off the ice and upper management-wise they were, but in terms of what they were doing on the ice, they were not a horrible team, but just not quite good enough to make the playoffs on most occasions. So Tocchet probably going to be in the mix. Bob Hartley is another name that you hear. Probably don't love the idea of Bob Hartley. He hasn't coached NHL in a while. Chris Drury knows him well. He was the head coach of the Cup-winning team from Colorado in 2001. So there's a relationship there. And Bob Hartley, arch nemesis of John Tortorella, when Tortorella was with the Canucks and Hartley was with the Flames. So Hartley was with the Flames for a while, way back when with the Avalanche. He was the head coach of the Thrashers. He's had success in this league. I just feel like the time has passed for Bob Hartley. So I wouldn't hate it, but I wouldn't love it. Something that I'd like even less would be Patrick Waugh. And that's a teammate of Drury's in Colorado. Patrick Waugh we have not seen since he was the head coach of the Avalanche. And he also had some success early. Believe there's ties with Alexis Lafreniere and Patrick Waugh. He's kind of a random name that you see out there, Waugh. And I wouldn't, it just, again, great player. Awesome. I mean, arguably maybe the best goaltender of all time, but would not be a fan of Patrick Waugh. Mike Babcock, no, I don't want Mike Babcock. Was great with Detroit for years. Things didn't really work out with Toronto, and seems like there were some really not so great stories with some of the younger players there as well. I don't think that Babcock's the right guy for this team. Like, if you're going to do that, just go with Torts. If we're going to go with someone that's more of a demanding coach who might butt heads with players, just go with Torts then. Chris Knobloch, I think he did a really good job, and I hope that he stays with Hartford. You know, who knows? Maybe he'll have some opportunities coming his way. But Knobloch, I think that interviewing Knobloch makes a lot of sense. I just don't see it happening because I think they're going to want to go with one of these bigger names. But Knobloch certainly is worthy of consideration. There's a few other guys. You know, Claude Julien, not really a fan of Claude Julien, who was let go by Montreal, had won a cup with Boston. But there's a lot of big names out there for sure. And one of the biggest ones is Rod Brind'Amour with Carolina. Now, that's someone who would be on the top of my list. I just can't see how he won't be back with Carolina. So it's one of those things where we won't really know about his status until what happens with the Hurricanes and whether they, you know, how far they may or may not go in the playoffs. So Brind'Amour would be a great guy to bring in. I think when push comes to shove, he'll be back with the Hurricanes. So yeah, that's pretty much about it in terms of potential replacements for David Quinn. And I think there's some interesting names on that list. And this is one of those things where there should be no rush. I mean, you don't want to wait too long, but they got some time. And I'm sure interview as many people as you can. And if you have someone that you really have in mind, obviously you don't want to lose that person. But I'm sure that Chris Drury will do his due diligence. And I'm very excited to see who they bring in. This is a very important and big decision as far as where they go. Firing Davidson Gordon was one thing because Chris Drury had been there, and I do believe that he can do that job. I believe that Drury can, you know, he's highly thought of in the industry. But where do they go with head coach? This is going to be his biggest decision yet, by far. We're going to just see where it goes. There's probably going to be some wild card names that get thrown out along the way. That's just how this goes too. Where all of a sudden, you know, per sources, we're hearing someone out of left field that, you know, is kind of making waves as someone that could maybe be a true candidate. Someone that, last person I'll bring up, Mark Messier. Again, I'd stay far away from him. It just doesn't make sense. That's just one of those things. That's like a nostalgic type of thing, just like Patrick Waugh. Mark Messier is one of the greatest players of all time, a Ranger legend. Don't go in that direction. I don't think they will. I really don't think that that'll be the case. But we'll see. If you told me that the Rangers hired Gerard Gallant, would be thrilled. John Tortorella, don't expect it, but would be happy about that also. So we will see where this goes, and we will definitely talk about it once the Rangers hire their next head coach.